Ever feel like you're just drowning in information, like you're trying to take a sip from a fire hose, but nothing's sticking?
Right.
Today, we're cracking the code on multimedia learning.
Yeah. How to make all that text and the audio and the video that we're all consuming, how to actually make it sink in.
Exactly. And it's not just about making things look fancy with multimedia, right?
No, no, not at all. It's about using those different formats strategically, like having a whole toolbox.
I like that. You've sent over a treasure trove of research on this, by the way.
Oh, yeah.
From Stanford's Open Virtual Assistant Lab, we've got Harvard's resources on remote teaching, even guides on educational app design. You went deep.
Well, you know me, I'm all about using the right tool for the job.
Right.
And especially when that job is learning, figuring out how to learn better.
Okay, so let's unpack this. Multimedia learning. Before we even go any further, how would you define that in a nutshell?
Okay, so imagine your brain is having a feast, right?
Right.
But instead of just one plate, you've got this whole buffet laid out. Text, images, audio, video. Multimedia learning is about experiencing information with all of your senses engaged. And the research shows that that actually helps it stick.
Makes sense. I bet I could describe a bicycle to you all day long, but if I show you a picture,
Exactly.
boom, instant understanding.
There's a whole world of research on why that is. And one of the leading figures, one of the pioneers in this field is Richard Mayer. His cognitive theory of multimedia learning, we'll call it CTML for short. It's like the Rosetta Stone for understanding how our brains learn with multimedia.
Okay, so hit me with the highlights. What are the key things that Mayer discovered about how our brains process all this multimedia madness?
Well, Mayer's theory is built on a few core ideas.
Yeah.
Right. So first, he said our brains have these two main channels for processing information, visual and auditory.
Sure.
Think of it like a two-lane highway
Okay.
going into your brain.
Okay.
But here's the thing. Each lane has a speed limit.
Oh, tell me about it. I try to check my email while I'm listening to a podcast.
Yeah.
And it's like my brain just hits a wall.
That's your cognitive capacity.
Yeah.
Your cognitive capacity saying, whoa, 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 too much traffic. That's another one of Mayer's big things.
Yeah.
Limited capacity. Our brains are amazing, but they can only juggle so much information at once, especially when it's coming from all these different sources.
So what's the solution? How do we avoid those brain traffic jams?
Well, that's where Mayer's third idea comes in.
Yeah.
Active processing. We learn best when we're actively engaged, making connections, not just passively absorbing. It's the difference between just reading a recipe and actually getting your hands dirty in the kitchen,
Oh, I see what you mean.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm starting to see why you're so excited about this deep dive. Okay, so we've got these two channels. They've got limited capacity, and we need to be actively engaged if we want the information to stick. How do Mayer's principles help us put this into practice? How do we actually use this information?
Well, let's start with one of his most fundamental principles, the multimedia principle.
Okay.
And it sounds obvious, but it's really important. Combining words and pictures is way more effective than just using words alone. Way more effective. In fact, studies show you're 6 times more likely to remember information when it's paired with a relevant image.
6 times.
6 times.
That's huge. So I'm guessing, a boring PowerPoint, just wall of text is not doing us any favors.
Definitely not the most brain-friendly approach. And it all goes back to those dual channels we were talking about.
Right.
When we pair words with visuals, we're essentially activating both those channels at the same time, giving our brain 2 ways to process and remember the information.
So it's like we're creating a mental map instead of just a list of directions.
Exactly. And Mayer's research shows that this dual coding approach leads to deeper understanding and better recall, especially for complex stuff.
Okay, that's one principle down. I'm ready for more brain hacks. What else did Mayer uncover? More brain hacks, I'm ready.
You got it. So remember how we talked about those 2 lanes of information, visual and auditory?
Right.
Mayer found that it's not just about using both. It's about how you use them. And that's where the modality principle comes in.
All right, spill the tea on modality. What's the secret sauce?
It's all about finding that sweet spot, right? Between redundancy and variety. Okay, so imagine you're watching a nature documentary, right?
Okay.
But the narrator is just reading the words that are already on the screen.
Yeah.
Total snooze fest.
Been there, done that, fast forwarded.
Right. So it's about using both those channels, visual and auditory, to complement each other, not just repeat the same information. So think about it like a powerful image paired with some really evocative music or a diagram that comes to life with a really concise voiceover explanation.
So it's like the difference between just listening to a lecture and actually like having a conversation.
Exactly. The modality principle is about creating a richer, a more engaging experience for your brain.
Okay, this is giving me some serious ideas for my next presentation. Fewer bullet points, more thought-provoking images.
Love it. Now, on top of using multimedia effectively, we've got to make sure our brains don't get lost in the weeds, right?
Especially with so much information coming at us these days, it really does feel like trying to drink from a fire hose sometimes.
Exactly. And that's where Mayer's principle of signaling comes in. Remember how we talked about those limited capacity lanes in our brains?
Mm-hmm.
Signaling is like putting up those road signs, to guide our attention to the most important information.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Give me an example. Like how do we signal effectively when we're learning?
Okay, think about a well-designed website.
Okay.
You've got headings, subheadings, you've got bullet points, maybe some bold text, maybe even some color coding going on to highlight the really important information.
Right.
Those are all signals, right? They help your brain navigate the content more easily.
It's like the difference between a treasure hunt with a map and one where you're just wandering around aimlessly hoping that you stumble upon something.
Exactly. And those signals aren't just for visual learners either, right? We can use auditory signals too.
Mhm.
So, like, think about changes in tone of voice or even just strategic pauses in a podcast episode to really emphasize a certain point.
Oh, it's all about creating those aha moments.
Exactly. Signaling is about making the information clear, concise, and possible to miss.
Mhm.
And this applies whether you're creating a presentation, whether you're writing an email, heck, even if you're just organizing your own notes.
Okay, this is starting to feel like we're really cracking the code here on how to like learn like a pro. But before we get too far ahead of ourselves, there was another one of Mayer's principles you mentioned earlier, segmenting.
Ah, yes. Segmenting. Segmenting is all about breaking down information into like manageable bite-sized chunks. Remember we talked about cognitive overload?
Oh, I know it well. It's like that feeling when you're scrolling through like an endless news feed and your brain just wants to shut down.
Exactly. Our brains aren't wired to process these huge, huge amounts of information all at once. We need those mental breaks, right? Those moments to pause, to reflect, to actually make connections. That's what segmenting does. It gives us permission to do that.
So instead of trying to cram everything in like one massive learning marathon, we should be breaking it down into shorter, more focused sprints.
Exactly. Think about it like this. Would you rather eat a whole pizza in one sitting? Or would you rather savor each slice?
Savoring all the way. It's about quality, not quantity.
Exactly. And the research backs that up, giving learners control over the pace of instruction. Huge for improving retention, for understanding, especially with complex topics. It's like hitting the pause button on that overwhelming fire hose of information and taking a sip at your own pace.
That's a game changer. It's not about cramming more in, it's about creating the space for those aha moments to happen.
And that's what effective learning is all about.
Absolutely. But Mayer's not the only one with some wisdom to share in this arena. You mentioned some fascinating research from Stanford and Harvard about how to apply these principles to remote teaching and even educational app design.
Oh, absolutely. What's so fascinating is that while Mayer laid the groundwork, there's a whole world of research building on his theories and applying them to the real world.
Okay, I'm ready to dive into that world. What else can we learn from the cutting edge of multimedia learning research?
Yeah.
So, cutting edge multimedia learning, what's got you jazzed from these Stanford and Harvard researchers?
Well, they've taken Mayer's principles and really run with them, especially when it comes to remote learning and educational apps.
Mm.
One thing that really struck me was how they're using these principles to make learning more personalized.
Personalized learning, like tailored to each student's like unique brain quirks. Tell me more.
That's exactly it. So imagine an app, right, that actually adjusts the pace of the instruction based on how you're doing, or one that lets you choose between different multimedia formats. Maybe you're a visual learner, but I thrive on audio explanations.
Okay, that's like next level. No
Yeah.
more one-size-fits-all learning experiences.
Right. And these researchers are finding that when learning is personalized like that,
Yeah.
engagement and knowledge retention, they go way up. It's like the difference between like a generic diet plan and one that's designed specifically for your metabolism and your fitness goals.
Now that you mention it, that reminds me of another point you made about those Stanford researchers, how they're tackling the challenge of distraction in the digital age.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, let's be real. We live in a world of notifications and pop-ups and endless scrolling. It's like our attention spans are under attack.
I know. I can barely make it through a news article without getting sucked into like some clickbait headline.
Right. So these researchers are looking at, like, how do you design learning environments that minimize those distractions, that maximize focus? Think about, like, apps that block your social media notifications while you're studying, or platforms that use gamification to make learning so engaging that you forget to even check your phone.
Okay, that's some next level Jedi mind trick
It's
stuff.
all about understanding how our brains are wired,
Yeah,
right?
okay.
And then using that knowledge to create learning experiences that work with our natural tendencies, not against them.
I love that. So we've covered a ton of ground here, from Mayer's foundational principles to the cutting edge of multimedia learning research. For our listeners who are feeling all fired up, they're ready to put this knowledge into action, what's one concrete takeaway that they can apply, like, today?
If I had to pick just one, it'll be this.
Yeah.
Be intentional, okay? So whether you are designing a presentation, writing an email, even just organizing your own notes,
Mm.
stop and think, how can I use multimedia to make this clearer, more engaging, easier to understand?
Hmm.
Ask yourself, would this information be better with an image, a diagram, maybe even like a short animation? Could I use headings or bullet points or color coding to make those key takeaways really pop?
It's about working smarter, not harder.
Right,
Yeah.
exactly. And remember, it's a journey. You don't have to become a multimedia master overnight. Just start experimenting. Maybe pick one or two principles, see what works for you, and then gradually incorporate more as you go.
And if you happen to create a learning experience so epic that it like rivals the latest blockbuster, be sure to share it with the world.
Absolutely. The more we share what we're learning, the more we all benefit.
Well said. And that, my friend, is a wrap on this deep dive into the fascinating world of multimedia learning. We explored how our brains process information, we uncovered some really powerful principles for optimizing learning, and we even got a glimpse into the future of education. So, what resonated most with you? What questions are still swirling around in your mind? We encourage you to keep exploring this fascinating field. Until next time, happy learning.